Is the rule-based global order falling? Post the Second World War, the framework that we set up, is it coming crashing down? The Cuban Missile Crisis, the fall of the Berlin Wall. Events like these shape how we interact with the world. Let us sit with Dr. JB to try and understand what lies ahead. Is there a possible solution, or is the world actually coming crashing down on us? Hello, sir.
Hello, Aditya.
Sir, today, as the world seems to be in a turmoil, I want to talk to you about it. Post the Second World War, the global world order had decided to accept a framework. You have been a very firm believer of that framework. My first question to you, sir, and this is going to be a direct one, is that global world order collapsing?
Collapsing may be an excessive word, but definitely it's in serious turmoil. Because the very nation, United States, that has laid the foundation for the global world order, World Trade Organization, Bretton Woods institutions, rules-based system, United Nations, use of force being primarily mandated by the UN Security Council, at least making a reasonable case before using force. Now, these are all the elements of rule-based order. If the very country that in many ways was the source of the foundation of this rule-based order, if they are oblivious to the global public good and are saying their nation is first and they don't care about the consequences to the rest of the world, obviously it's in serious danger. At the same time, you can't say it's really collapsing, it's in trouble. Take global trade. United States caused tremendous obstacles to global trade. Countries like India early on, for decades, rejected global trade. China, until the 2000 or so, year 2000, 2001, was not part of WTO. But now all these countries which faced colonialism and therefore were skeptical of global order and global trade are now embracing it with gusto. It's the rich countries, particularly the United States, that's rejecting it. Nevertheless, if you take the volume of global trade in terms of value, it's about $35 trillion in a global GDP of something like $108, $107 trillion. It's more than one third. So it's not really collapsed, but it's stagnating and it's in trouble.
So, on that front, you mentioned global trade. Global trade seems to be doing all right. But another philosophical thing that this order was based on was rationality, right? Now we always assume that the leader of the global world would be rational. That leader is increasingly becoming irrational. And there are other irrational players that we'll not mention, but there are irrational players. Do you see rationality disappearing?
Whether it's a long-term trend or not, it's too early to say. But definitely the fact is that the leader of the preeminent global power today, both economically and militarily, seems to care not a bit about what the global public opinion is or even what global public good is. Look at the Iran crisis. Even on an issue which is so fundamentally affecting the lives of hundreds of millions of people, potentially billions of people, if you're lucky for several months, maybe a year, if you're unlucky, it could be for a whole generation. Look at the American public opinion. I was watching CNN and BBC, I think sometime last night. It's almost as if they were living in a different world. There's hardly any serious discussion on Iran crisis and its impact on the rest of the world. Yes, there was some discussion, but more in the context of either supporting or opposing Trump's leadership in domestic politics in the United States. And the only concern they have is the price rise at the petrol stations, gas stations in the US. And that's because US does not have price control laws. If they have price control laws, their supplies exceed the demand. Therefore, prices can be kept under control. But there's never going to be a shortage in the United States. Otherwise, it's all about, say, the dismissal of Pamela Bondi as the Attorney General, the statement made by Bruce Springsteen, a famous folk artist, singer, criticizing Donald Trump and Trump's reaction to that, and Trump's statements with regard to states having to take more role in discharging welfare like daycare, etc. It's almost the global crisis that we're facing now on account of Iran and the potential disruption of the supply chains of energy systems, maybe on a medium or long term basis, is a footnote. So that shows that the preeminent global power is somewhat unconcerned about global good. Now, power and complete disregard to global consequences, they're obviously incompatible. So, in that sense, either America will have to mend itself to deserve global leadership, or the rest of the globe must fashion together instruments and unity, disregarding the political and other differences between them, in order to have some modicum of progress in terms of world order.
So you mentioned the word global public opinion. And just I think yesterday or a couple of days ago, Artemis was in space and it clicked a very nice picture of the Earth. You can see the whole of Earth. There, from there, it looks like as if there is no difference. Everybody is one, right? I want your take on it. You have seen the world change in these 50, 60 odd years, 70 years. Is there a global public opinion? Is there a we existing in the global order?
Yes and no. On fundamentals, obviously, yes. Now, for instance, now Carl Sagan made this very famous when he talked about the cosmos, how we are a small little blue planet around one yellow dwarf, one little star, in one small little solar system, in one galaxy out of hundreds of billions of galaxies. Now, when you look at it, a degree of humility, a sense of loneliness, and a desire to band together to protect ourselves collectively is a natural norm. I think a lot of enlightened people feel that way across the world. Is that a majority? Nowhere near that, but a significant minority. Equally, there is a reaction to this kind of a global approach to things from a significant number of national voters. In fact, even the United States politics and as of Mr. Donald Trump, in many ways, is attributed to that. Globalization has actually created some losers, where there are many winners, and the losers have greater voice because the loss is felt more profoundly than the benefit is perceived, and therefore it has voting consequences. And in a country with a somewhat skewed electoral system like the United States, where 8 or 9 states play all the dominant role in national elections, and that determines the outcome. But in much of the rest of the world, I think there is a combination of both. Take countries like China and India. Both are emerging economies.
Yes.
Both are very large countries. India is, of course, very diverse, but China also is a bit diverse. But China is authoritarian single party system. India is democratic, it's robust, loud, noisy democracy. And see the way they're combining both the nationalist aspirations of economic growth and prosperity and protecting national interest on the one hand, with the global goals of, say, energy transition, greening, global warming. Now, India could easily have taken the path that we have taken, most developing countries have taken in the past, namely that, look, our per capita emissions are very low. You created the problem. You can't ask us to pay the price. Therefore, we'll do it at our own leisure. We could easily have taken the stand. We are not taking that stand. We are saying, yes, we also have an obligation. And for our own sake, we need to go there. And therefore, China has done a superb job of going for electrification of vehicles and solar panels and batteries and so on and so forth. India, while we're not as good as China yet, we're definitely on path. So we're actually, I think, many countries in the world, particularly the emerging economies which are bearing the burden of poverty, are combining national interest and elements of prosperity with the global good, and they're not seeing any contradiction. It is surprisingly the richest country on earth which is seeing a contradiction between global good and national good. I think that's an artificial construct.
So, on that note, I have a lot to unpack from that answer. But you mentioned that a lot of what's happening in America is also a reaction to the domestic politics.
Absolutely.
So, once we had this nation state idea, right, and we knew that probably this is the best way to go forward, was it inevitable that a country would become so powerful that their domestic politics could dictate the global order?
I don't know if it's inevitable or not, but that's the reality today. Empirically, United States is the preeminent power economically and militarily, and in terms of global influence and trade and money flows and reserve currency and banking system, you name it. And it's also undoubtedly true that American domestic politics is dominating the global conditions today. It's almost as if the global consequences be damned. Maybe one of the reasons is the sense of threat they felt of nuclear Armageddon during the Cold War is no longer felt. While we still have nuclear weapons on a very large scale, particularly in the hands of United States and Soviet Union, Russia, and to a significant extent in China, and some other countries too have some weapons now. They don't feel the threat. Maybe once that very survival threat was there, America and other countries behaved in a more global manner, so to speak. Once that threat is gone, I think it's all dog eat dog world. Uh, Inevitable or not, I cannot say, but the fact is, it's a reality today in the United States. Now, will the cycle pass? Will American public realize that the global good actually is in their own national interest? Uh, and independent of that, global good is something that ought to be promoted, because if we all destroy ourselves collectively, that's not going to help any country. That is obviously the common sense point of view. Let's hope that they'll rediscover that. But certainly we are now in that phase.
Yeah. So I will come to developing countries, India and China. But you mentioned how America is the all powerful, right? But in this sort of growing age of multipolarity that people keep on saying, China is also a powerful nation. USSR was a powerful entity. There are other nations that we can sort of pick and choose, maybe slightly powerful and slightly on the middle side of the things. They don't react this way. What makes USA sort of an example? Maybe China is not reacting that way. China is also all powerful. What's the difference between these two nations?
Democratic system and its perversions, given the unique nature of American political system. On the one hand, the gerrymandering of constituencies, the congressional boundaries are determined entirely by the political contingencies of each state legislature. Along with that, the primary election, where only a limited number of die-hard party apparatchiks vote, and therefore the real election is in the primary election rather than the national election. Therefore, the need to compromise and build consensus and come to the middle path, that is the essence of democracy. Yes. Reconciling conflicting differences and finding the center. That has largely disappeared in American federal politics. That is the heart of their systemic crisis. And that, along with that, what was once perceived to be a great advantage of the West in terms of manufacturing and global trade has now become advantage of the countries like China in particular, to some extent other countries, India, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, etc., are also trying to make a mark. Suddenly the West perceives itself in some kind of a danger, because they were always used to being absolute at the top and these countries being uncompetitive compared to them. That was their mental image. Well, their prosperity levels went up further. Their quality of life has gone up. Oftentimes, human beings don't measure progress in terms of the absolute quality of life. Even you and I, even our families, even within societies, we don't look at where we are today compared to where we were. We compare with others and say the difference between him and me is, it was, let's say, tenfold earlier. If it is fivefold now, even if my total wealth has increased, let's say, another fivefold, I'm not satisfied, because we want to maintain that distance. I think that's what's happening in countries like the United States, particularly because the US is insulated geographically, two great oceans, very self-reliant in a very substantial measure of things like energy crisis. Now it doesn't touch America, except that because oil is a fungible commodity, it is tradable and non-perishable, and therefore the price is globalized. If America has something like a price control law, like very often countries like India have, they have surplus production relative to their needs, and therefore the price can be controlled. So they are really not affected by the oil crisis, no matter what happens to the Gulf. Whereas the rest of the world, much of the rest of the world will be destroyed economically. So they're insulated not only geographically but also economically, despite all the linkages that they have. So they're not feeling the heat, and this is a very short-sighted approach. Sometimes maybe some price will have to be paid by the American system in order for them to wake up and realize that global interests and their national interests are very substantially aligned. In their case, actually much more so than other countries.
Now, sir, I want to talk about the energy crisis. Developing countries like India and similar countries in the global south, as they call it, right? They need some sort of permanence in the global order for them to develop, right? Now, you can always make a case that, hey, look, America is already so developed, and like you say, it doesn't even need such huge quantities of oil from outside the country because it's insular. It does not give a damn, right? But what about these countries? Even if we start doing something now, it will take us another 2, 3, 4, 5 decades to come up with some energy model that we can sort of rely on. What do these countries do?
Let's deconstruct this. The most important element for every country, particularly developing countries, is energy security right now. The second is global trade. The whole idea of Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage, that Everybody benefits if you if you allow the countries that produce at the most efficient level to actually produce and sell. So all of us benefit collectively. There's common good promoted. The third is global warming, independent of energy security, because this is a collective global thing. The fourth is we require global technology, easy flows, global investment, because world over, it's believed that there's something like $340 trillion of money waiting to invest. We are in a capital surplus situation for the first time in human history on that mega scale. And yet, we are capital starved. Take a country like India. So we have to see that capital goes where it is actually needed, and global technology. And of course, finally, mobility of people in this day world. These are the basic things that we require. Now, energy security, I'm very pessimistic in the short term. If something terribly goes wrong in the Gulf in the next 2, 3 weeks, I hope it will not happen. If we are praying people, let's pray, because it's the madness of a couple of people. Like, if Mr. Trump actually carries out his threat of destroying Iranian civilian infrastructure and population, and Iran's counter threat that they will destroy the oil fields of Middle East, no matter what the consequences. If indeed the worst case scenario materializes, for a generation, all of us in the rest of the world, except maybe United States, Russia, Canada, and maybe Norway and countries like that, most of the rest of us will be in serious, serious crisis for a generation. No matter how good we are, we can't transition within a year or two. But in about 2 decades' time, while we pay a humongous price, even without such a catastrophe, I think now there is an impetus to accelerate the movement towards renewable sources of energy and other forms of energy. And if need be, global warming be damned, we will convert coal into other fungible forms of energy, because we all have abundant coal. Even India has abundant coal, though of lower quality. China has abundant coal. So depending on oil, if there is shortage, we'll move on other directions. There will be an added cost, but we'll move aggressively in those directions. And the transition will take place in about 2 decades' time, because luckily, in the last 10, 15 years, the costs of technology have plummeted. The efficiency has gone up. Solar power, batteries, storage, electric cars, and so on and so forth. And of course, countries like ours must regain the notion of sacrifice for the public good. I don't need to use my petrol or diesel driven car to get ice cream. I can use public transport. I can bicycle. I can walk. I can use electric vehicle. I can consume less, because even if I can afford in terms of the purse, uh, the, the country's interests demand that I restrain myself and be frugal. So we have to now relearn the frugality which we exercised anyway in the past out of necessity, because of poverty. Now there's a necessity of different kind. Even if there's not that much of poverty, there is shortage. But in 2 decades' time, I think we'll come out of it. But those 2 decades are going to be very, very painful. Growth will take a big hit. And much of our resources will have to be dovetailed to areas which we took for granted earlier. Energy redundancies, more storage, more reserves for buying more stock and keeping it idle. Then alternative shipping routes. Saudi Arabia, for instance, has that Yanbu route from east coast to west coast. Maybe they'll have double that or treble that. Now, supposing there is another difficulty in the other strait, namely Bab el Mandab, what will happen then? Therefore, alternative energy supplies. More exploration at a time when actually we are saying no more exploration, it's not necessary. I think countries will aggressively go for more exploration now. So a lot of redundancy and wastage of human resources and monetary resources will be there. But if that's the price we have to pay, that's the price we'll pay. But 2 decades later, I think things will get better. But we will have terrible 2 decades in the worst case scenario. In the best case scenario, we'll have a pretty bad year across the world, because the consequences of even this much of disruption are not going to be undone overnight. Let's hope that we all quickly get together and somehow use our collective clout and leverage to persuade both the United States and Iran to get some sense back in their own interest and global interest.
So you mentioned let's all get together collectively, right? Uh, the Second World War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, events like this is where we sort of go back to the drawing board and maybe think of how we can redesign the world, right? Do you think this is one such event? A, and I have a follow up question. Do you think with the polarization that we are seeing today, is it possible to get to a consensus?
Mark Carney, I think, very aptly summed up what is the need of the hour in the, I think, Davos conference. And that's a very celebrated speech, a very well drafted speech. I think much of the world is now using that language. Middle powers must get together. Take, for instance, Asia. Now, China, India, Pakistan, take these three countries. For a variety of reasons, we have problems with Pakistan, problems with China. But on this issue, we all have common interest. We all need energy supplies. We all need energy security. There's absolutely no reason why we cannot cooperate on this. We must forget other pettinesses and differences. So is the case with the rest of the world. So I believe Europe, Middle East depends on what happens in the next 2 weeks. If the disruption is not going to be permanent, then Middle East will be very much part of it. If it's going to be permanent, then they're going to be a different kind of hell. Asia, and primarily Europe and Asia, that includes China, India, Japan, etc. We all have a very profound common interest, very real, existential common interest. Therefore, while we cannot overnight replace the United States, US power cannot be undermined overnight. While its influence goes down because the trust has gone down, the respect has gone down. But that's different from real power and its ability at this point of time. For decades to come, I think that will be there. The rest of us, I think, there is going to be a realistic framework, and Mr. Trump certainly is accelerating that process. So it's, while difficult, it's not impossible. Because the bigger danger now, I think, surpasses the smaller local internecine quarrels.
Yes. So this is going to be my last question, and I want you to take your time and sort of explain this to me, because from what I'm struggling to sort of get my heads around is America is allowed to be irrational with a leader like Trump. And countries like India, developing countries, countries with less resources, Pakistan, China, not China for example, but Sri Lanka or other countries are expected to be rational. They are expected to sort of rally together and sort of, for a lack of better word, school this bully right now. Is this not hypocrisy? And if it is, then is this the way of the world? Might will always be right?
Yours is a case of description. You know, Karl Marx said famously, everybody talks about the weather, but nobody knows what to do about it. I think it was actually Mark Twain who said it. And Karl Marx also said basically it's about changing the world. How do you change the world? So you described a certain situation where a dominant country is acting like a school bully. Yes. But once we recognize it, we have to figure out how to get around that. There's no point passing moral judgments or condemnation and very loud protests will not help. It may actually make things worse. So let's figure out how to do. Now, obviously, countries that are much more interdependent in terms of trade, energy, technology, other things, etc., which are not isolated geographically, therefore they face the consequences of what happens collectively together. Frankly, all humanity faces it, but some countries feel it much more. Like, we share actually water resources. Brahmaputra comes from Chinese territory to us. Our Indus River goes from Indian territory to Pakistan. And monsoons are common to India and Pakistan. And many problems, if a locust comes from Africa, it affects all of us. No, it will come via Pakistan, incidentally. So, these are national boundaries drawn on paper. But geography and the genuine human needs, they transcend national boundaries. And therefore, I think it's not merely altruism. It is enlightened self-interest. We need that. We'll continue to have our differences. Like, for instance, India, the way it's managing its relations with China is a superb example. China has been a bad faith player, not only in 1962, but later on in 1969, then recently in Galwan and Jammu and Kashmir, and so on and so forth. And despite all that, both countries have the good sense to realize that, well, right, we'll put a pin on that. We'll figure out how to improve trade, how to improve other relationships, and how to work together on energy security and so on and so forth. I think that's the only adult way forward. It's not because we are altruistic, we are not Mahatma Gandhis, we are practical, we have to coexist. Just like within a society, we have to coexist. Even if we have differences of view, we reconcile them. Across nations too, we have to coexist. America too, no matter how much of a giant it is, needs others. They cannot forever be in this mood of isolation and anger and bullying. They will, I'm sure, wake up hopefully sooner than later. But whether they wake up quickly or not, we must all work together, at least to the limited extent of protecting ourselves. Otherwise, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind.
So, if let me know if I'm getting this correctly, sir. You're trying to say that there are such vested interests intertwined within each countries have that irrespective of their moral reasons, they would try to de-accelerate the war rather than forming a block. And
Look at the way right now India is sharing adversity. At a time when we are desperately in need of energy sources, we are worried what will happen because, after all, whatever resource we have, whatever we procure, it simply is not enough for our needs. We all know that. And we don't know how long this adversity will last. But we are willing to share our resources with Bangladesh, with Sri Lanka, with Nepal, I presume it's Bhutan also, undoubtedly, Maldives, and we've also offered to Seychelles and Mauritius. Now, it's not merely large-heartedness. It is a recognition that our interests are collective. It's not that we are ignoring our national interest. Nobody accuses us of that. But there are some problems which transcend the national boundaries. It's common sense. And that is something that we have to recognize, even as we guard jealously our national independence, our sovereignty, and national interest.
thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. So that was Dr. JB trying to give a much more realistic take on what's happening in the Gulf and telling us that there is an optimistic outlook to all of it. Thank you, everybody.